Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we are going back to Kill Team to paint a bunch of super cool orcs. I haven't painted a sci-fi orc since the beginning of the channel, so it's time to put an end to this serious and unforgivable lack of greenskins. Here I wanted to spit paint something like a quote-unquote expanded heavy metal style, full of interesting weathering, grime, dust and scratches, but unrealistically silly and fun. Still sharp, high contrast and illustrational enough to be read like something coming from an official GW rulebook, but with an accent on desaturated grittiness and tank-like effects. A combo that I feel is always perfect for the orcs' visual and conceptual craziness. And because of all these rockets and highly explosive weapons, of course I had to go with the Bad Moon scheme. Plus, yellow is always super fun to paint and make dirty. I love the GW scale consistency of these last few years, and the little detail of having the boss bigger and bulkier than all the others is spot on. Opening disclaimer. Pay attention in this workflow because, for the sake of peak efficiency, I'll be cutting corners and jumping around steps quite a lot. And to prove that, the extreme optimization of high-quality speed painting reaches even the priming stage, that I quickly solve with a super functional, cold, desaturated green, that, despite what you may think, is here only marginally because I'm painting greenskin orcs. The main point of the foundational cold green is to establish a general contrast with the subtle, warmer environmental light, towards which I will tend a bit more with each new passage. And as a bonus, it will also remain here and there basically as it is, as a low-key transitional connective tone, mainly used as a base for pants and shirts, and a moldy shadow for metals. And as a corollary of this idea, it will also gently contrast with the intrinsic warm yellow tones of the armors, that are the major elements and larger volumes of these models. A proper blue would of course generate more chromatic contrast in this scheme, but if I want something less cartoony and more grounded, I need to push a bit less on the gas pedal of that particular kind of contrast, focusing more on values and textures. I personally love to establish the true metallic bits as soon as possible. Because of the nature of the metallic flakes, with both brush and airbrush, metallic paints are always a bit unpredictable and less intuitive to quickly apply in a smooth, solid covering continuity, especially with the airbrush. So, I fix these layers and their overspray in an early stage, and I tend to use the new applications of standard paints to hide the witness marks of this lack of precision, and also to imply interesting reflections of colors over the polished, ideally reflective true metallic materials. Okay, maybe not so polished and shiny for orcs, but still, more than matte fabric. You got the idea. And of course, when the target is really small and sharp, I briefly move to the brush. Be open and elastic with your procedural choices, and from your toolbox of techniques, always choose the best tool for the situation of the moment. Then, I lock in place the main local tone of the skin, simply letting the forms of the sculpts, combined with the zenithal wargaming angle of the airbrush/virtual light, do all the major volumetric work for me. Same idea for the yellow of the armors, that converges on similar warm vibes and higher values, and that of course, definitely less subtle. Establishes the classic tribal Bad Moon's bright yellow, that, as everyone knows, produces flashier and bigger explosions. These models are quite intricate, and I want a clear, clean-cut separation of the major details. So I use the brush again to base a few darker elements here and there. It's difficult to convey the speed of this stage, especially with this sudden switching between airbrush and brush. But to let you understand how basic, quick and dirty I'm going here, note that I didn't even set up the wet palette to extend the life of these tiny reservoirs of paint. The clever tactic of this first block of the workflow is to base the small dark bits after the lighter, high value and high saturation work done with the airbrush. Alternating the basic, local extreme values, the ones intrinsic to the materials, I can more easily produce a sharp, clean separation, leaving the step with absolutely zero overspray and contamination from the speedy airbrushing. Also, contrast paints work better over a mid to light value base, and there will be a perfect time to add a dusty, cohesive flow later. So again, just some flat basing of the numerous, but luckily quite samey repeated details, to arrive as quickly as possible to the fun part of freehands and heraldry. And thanks to the magic of oil washing coming later, I can paint super complex stuff like teeth for example, in this super simple, totally flat way. For gaming, I like to solve my heraldry/decoration stage with fluid and very opaque paint, and more in general, with a healthy mix of simple freehanding and decals, to kind of blend the visual edge between the two, and make the way too perfectly sharp transfers less obvious and overpowering. Here, be mindful about the timing and the alternation of materials. That's the most important aspect of this stage. The orcish flames and the geometrical patterns are super organic and virtually painted by the rough hands of orcs, so very safe and easy to paint, even on small, convoluted shapes. Just grab a few references to better catch the general feel, and you're good to go. Then, after the pure black, but before the decals, I suddenly introduce a bit of initial volumetric modulation and complexity, increasing the values of the black bits with a localized pass of semi-transparent grey. And the first gentle application of pure white. Not only on the black parts, but following the idea of the top-down flow of a general zenithal light, also on the peaks of every major shape. And again, this layer has to be first and gentle, because it will come back again after the decals, to make them better integrated and flowy. You'll see how in a moment. So, since in this project I'm introducing a bunch of decals, I take the time to handle them in the proper, super professional way. The trick for a perfect, seamless integration is to sandwich the transfers between two aggressively glossy layers. The first one flattens the micro-roughness and imperfections of the matte acrylic base, granting an easy manipulation and a perfectly flat adhesion of the decals to the surface. And the second layer after the application levels and erases the borders, flattening and integrating the edges in the structure of the sandwich. Oh, and I didn't talk about the decal products because they just make them softer, to adapt more easily on complex round shapes, so not really mandatory. And honestly, very clear instructions are literally on their bottles, so it would be a bit redundant. And as the prophecy said, here is again transparent white. that in a single pass takes away a bunch of saturation from reds and yellows, and the blocky solidity from black, while at the same time bringing everything up to speed with the value of the light all around, for a perfect, this time less structural, but more value and chromatic integration. A note here. The second sandwiching layer of gloss varnish I was talking about, in this case, actually happens after the white, and right before the oil stage, to simply uniform this whole first block of the work under the same finish, and give it a uniform physical behavior for oils. You know that I rarely use varnish before oil washes, to get a better merge of layers and pigments, and a gentle but rich and painterly flow of multiple tones. So this is the iconic exception that confirms the rule. In this workflow I have in my hands the perfect storm, because from the beginning I'm aiming to a sharper look, and I'm on a decals heavy project that absolutely need gloss varnish. So I'm totally going to use its presence and low surface tension to make the washes flow more easily and precisely, mainly into details and crevices, leaving only little, subtle traces on the raised parts, because, very simply, they don't have a micro rough foundation to grab and sink in. Also, you probably noticed that my main tonal and volumetric ingredients are super cheap student-grade oils that don't stain and stick much, and that, because of their large, rough pigments, set with rough, dusty edges, and leave a bunch of cool, random artifacts that are perfect to get free extra information for the weathered look. After a very quick and dirty cleanup of the excess of paint with Q-tips, and then a coat of matte varnish to take away the leftover glossiness, I close the foundational work, changing the color and nature of a few metallic bits. Especially when I'm forced to use varnish, I like to do this kind of thing to reintroduce different finishes and feels from different materials. And with this specific timing, the bronze/brass bits will look shinier, more poppy and saturated than the rest. And I'll get similar subtle variations in the brushwork that will come in a second. So know that, if you want, you can always plan around and swap the timing of a uniforming matte coat to get very different and interesting eye-catching effects. So I land on the pure brush phase, needing only a crazily limited palette of super light tones, because shadows and all the midtones are totally solved by all the convoluted previous stages. Also super fun and relaxing. There's no need for subtlety here, because everything applied in this stage is just pure texture. And the fact that I'm painting orcs makes those textures even in less need of subtlety than usual. An aspect that we often forget is how important the vibe and nature of a subject are at informing and guiding techniques and brushstrokes. So in this case, the iconic roughness of the race and army is not an excuse to simplify or being sloppy, but a guideline to better land on their visual iconic ideal and look. I know, this may sound a bit too philosophical for a quick wargamey project about orcs, but all my speed painting ideas and tricks come from the simplification, or better distillation, of high-end display painting, or even proper canvas painting, trying to understand and extrapolate the lowest common denominators that make them work. So you have to endure this aspect of my tutorials. My best advice here is start and focus on the edges. Not really because the heavy metal style is basically built on them, even even if it's for sure a part of it. But because on this kind of armors and all these mechanical, geometrical sharp shapes, borders and edges are volumetrically, literally in terms of amount and extension of surfaces, the most numerous bits. So as soon as you have the main ones in place with some modulation, and if you really want to show off, a bit of scratchy visual noise around them, your work is basically done. I close the work with the mid-value warm silver to sharpen in the same way the metallic bits. Because of the darker baseline and the dirty, rusty nature of these metals, I don't feel the need for anything shinier or lighter. And honestly, I don't want to attract too much attention on these bits, that I think work better like a transitional mass of mechanical stuff. And here is the final result. More or less 6 hours of work for a project that feels like the perfect transition from the super clean stuff of the last videos and the grimdark renderings that are itching at the back of my mind for the next workflows. No spoilers. Also, it's super refreshing to paint again for my personal roster of Kill Team warbands. And I think you can easily see the extra cutting of corners, general simplification, and different adjustments I'm making for these even purer gaming projects. Army and speed painting is always a game of compromises and tough choices, and in the years, I came to totally love the mental exercise of visualizing an acceptable aesthetic baseline, and then finding the shortest way to get there. The point I'm trying to make here is always think and be conscious of what you are doing and why, because in the mini world there's still way too much it works because it works. See you in the next one! If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community. Or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!
Vieni a vedere la stella.
Arrivo subito, dammi un secondo.
Vieni adesso.